Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not to Comic Book. This being a show we're talking about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Flash. A great episode. This episode, we finally get to see fully Nora's side of things and kind of get her perspective on a lot of things. I did not realize, we kind of got a lot of interesting things. For one, did not know that literally Nora went so much of her life not knowing that her dad was the Flash. I thought that was something she knew. She just didn't know she had powers. We knew about that because obviously that was the big thing that pissed her off about Iris in the first place. But it's I did not know that she didn't know. Maybe that came up earlier in the season. I don't remember her making that a point of oh, I didn't even know you were the Flash. It's I thought she literally spent, well, she did talk about her entire life. She grew up worshiping the Flash. Oh my God, he's such an amazing hero. But obviously she never knew that the two were the same, So that detail was kind of interesting. Obviously, she shares a lot of characteristics with her dad. Obviously, she wanted to be, in the same job as her dad. Even sharing the characteristic of being super late all the time. And I love it. It's also she's super excited because she thinks the metahuman behind this case, it's a speedster. And it turns out it is. But apparently there hasn't been a speedster popping up since your mom did, a story decades ago about the crisis, which I'm whoa. Which crisis are we talking about? This time travel stuff, dude. I was thinking, could it be referencing Crisis on Earth X? But then I'm no. It's got to be Crisis on Infinite Earths. The crossover that hasn't happened yet. Because when we see Barry's message, now we got more context on what happened to him exactly. Because at the end of it, Barry's there, recording a message for Iris. I'm skipping around here, so I do apologize. But, it looks like he was on a battlefield at the time. I'm you disappeared during the Crisis on Earth X. The Crisis on Infinite Earths. I was holy crap. So that's what happens, which we know that happens in 2024. But then maybe just because of everything that goes down, because that's when Barry originally disappeared, but maybe... Well, because the timeline has changed, because he originally disappeared in 2024, so maybe it still applies. So maybe the crossover is going to happen a few years into the future, or maybe Barry's going to do some time traveling due to crossover, maybe potentially. I don't know. Because I wonder, does anyone present day as in 2049, know the context of under what context Barry disappeared? And I guess no one does, or at least that's more stuff they're keeping. Because, she didn't want to go to her mom for anything because, the moment she found out, oh, crap, my mom's been lying to me my entire life. They already had a complicated relationship because her mom was very overprotective. Obviously, Iris lost the man that she loved. So it's her daughter is someone she cares about and loves. It's the last piece of Barry that she has. So, of course, she's going to be very overprotective. Where are you at? Are you there alone? This and that. Obviously, she had, Nora has her best friend Leah, who's one of the few people she can turn to. And I love that her friend kind of geeks out about all this stuff too. They end up, because this whole episode revolves around a speedster known as Godspeed, which I was whoa, that's so interesting. So I guess because he gets introduced under these circumstances, because whoa, why are you in the future? If anything, you would be in the past, where the speed storm happened at the end of season 3, but it's no, it's a different Godspeed. It's the trajectory situation, even the Savitar situation of obviously these are very different interpretations of those characters. Obviously Savitar's situation in the show is specific to the show. I don't think his story plays out like that in the comic books. Who Savitar really is doesn't play out like that. Even Godspeed, in this case, it's oh, Godspeed ended up being someone who used Velocity 9, the same thing as trajectory. So it's so interesting too. But I guess there's notes on all species, but I just think it's interesting because trajectory has our own entry too. It's a very sad entry, but the fact is that he's using Velocity 9 to make himself look the way he does. Because even his design, at least the picture I saw of Godspeed, once again, this is something I read up a while back. His design looked different, so that might have been a more modern take on the design, or maybe this is how he always, or maybe this is, I don't know. I feel I thought he looked different. Maybe he did have the pure white suit. Maybe I'm misremembering. Maybe I'm thinking of another speedster because I came across a long list of speedsters. But nevertheless, but that is interesting. that this deals with him. So like I said, under the show won't create him under the circumstances that he would normally be created, which is what I kept talking about before of like the speed storm that happens at the end of 3. Apparently in the comic books, that's what creates him. It's a whole interesting thing. So, but we won't get that context. And I guess with the way the show has played out, it makes sense why that didn't play out the way it did. But nevertheless, obviously the show is doing its own thing, which isn't no problem. It's just kind of interesting. But I do love that Nora at first kind of thinks she gets her powers from being struck by Godspeed, because even Leah's like, oh my god, that's the same thing that happened to the original, what happened to the Flash, and Nora's kind of losing control of her powers and stuff like that. Let's not forget there was the whole conversation she had, with Barry before about how like she never knew about Barry's failures. Obviously the Flash Museum only highlighted his success, so she kind of feels like a failure of like, oh, I'm not getting this right the first time. Like her speed's out of control. She's trying to help out the cops catch some bad guys, and she's bouncing all over the police cars, shorting them out and everything, and she feels like such a fair. And I love her friend Leah being like Femme Flash, coming up with names, and it's kind of like, oh, that didn't work. And she's like, coming up with superhero names is so hard. And it's like, yeah, Cisco makes it seem so easy the way he just comes up with hero and villain names. That has like be a nice little wink and nod to him. But it's actually her who discovered the whole thing that was blocking Nora's abilities. Because it's interesting, because the only reason why it got found out in the first place is because she obviously got attacked by Godspeed, and she went to the hospital, and they had discovered that, and obviously things kind of being a little weird, and Leah looked into it and found out about it. So that kind of put everything in question for her, especially when she confronts her mom about everything. And for her mom, it's like, oh, she's not the only one. Literally everyone in your life, which I'm assuming is everyone she's gotten close to in present day, 2019. Everyone she's gotten close to in the past, or everyone that's known the truth about her situation, has been lying to her entire life. Like, obviously, we know the context earlier now, like, oh, she didn't even know her dad was the Flash. And so for her, a lot of the stuff that Iris didn't make sense. But now, in retrospect, Iris, having been down that path of like being so scared about her dad dying, that she understands why her mom did what she did. It's like, you were trying to protect me from, it's like, she's like, I'm trying to protect you from this city, from, from yourself, because she knows who she is. It's like, you're your dad's daughter. So of course you're going to be like your dad and want to save people and be a hero, but being a hero comes at a cost. And this city, there's always going to be a new danger around the corner. And I can't, she didn't want to take the chance to lose Nora just like she did Barry, And the sad thing is, when it was all said and done, Nora, she lost her best friend. Her best friend died in her arms, which is actually kind of interesting, like in a sad way. Like, the fact is, who ended up killing her? A speedster, phasing his hand through her, which is interesting. And who does she turn to with all of this situation? She turns to Eobard, who's notorious for killing people like that. It's kind of interesting, But I like that whole thing about Eobard, like, recognizing the signs about Nora of, like, oh yeah, her soles of her shoes, like her pants, the burns on her, like their sleeves, and like the wind burn on her face, because it was almost like, for him, it was like, it made him nostalgic because he hasn't run like that in ages, like feeling the speed of, being a speedster, and he recognized the signs, because obviously, like, the guard was like, oh yeah, no one's visited him in like 15 years, which I'm curious who's the last person that visited him. I'm assuming maybe it might have been Iris. I assume out of anybody. Couldn't be Barry, because that was like 15 years ago, and Barry disappeared in 2024, so that would have been like 2034, yeah, something like that. So I'd assume Iris. So he's been definitely locked up for a very, very long time. What's also interesting too is we kind of get a little more context of why she didn't know anything about Eobard, because it's not like, oh, she didn't know of like his connection to Barry. It's like, no, she didn't know anything about him, because everything connected to him was locked. The only thing that was in there was the date that he got arrested, and I'm assuming that's because Iris didn't want to take the chance that Nora might be there, because I guess, well, because in the grand scheme of things, I think it makes sense, because because everything that he did was connected to Barry, and the last thing Iris wanted was people to know about Barry being the Flash, and that would have led to Nora finding out about him being the Flash. They would have never, it was to keep his identity safe and stuff like that from the world, but also from Nora, so she wouldn't fall on his tracks. So I think that was her way of protecting her. But obviously, like, a lot of her attempts to protect her ended up backfiring. And even present day, Iris is like, it's my fault. And Barry's like, no. She's like, yes, it is. Like, I literally, because I lied to Nora, she had no one she can turn to. Literally, the only person she can turn to after Leah died was Eobard, because he was the only person that would tell her the truth, who knew everything, And it's that sad thing of, like, what, backfiring, your attempts to try and protect the person you care about. Because obviously, once again, it's like Nora's perception of her mom isn't like, because she's got a warped perceptive, because like her image of her mom is warped, because it's like, oh, she lied to me, so it undoes any good that was between her and her mom. Just because for her it's like, oh, my mom's a monster. But it's like, no, Iris just was a very overprotective person who lied to her and stuff like that, because she's an overprotective mom. So So Iris kind of thought who she was in the future was bad, but obviously Barry always was like, no, I know everything you ever did, you had a reason for doing it. So he always supported her decisions in that regard, even though she hadn't necessarily made those decisions yet. I just remembered in my head, because I kept having the number 25 in my head, and I couldn't remember. It's like, right, that's how long ago the device got put in her. Which is interesting. I guess that must have been when she first showed signs of having powers. Just because I think I was under the assumption, like, the moment she was born, that the power dampener was kind of automatically put in her. But I guess it's like, no, like, it wasn't until she was probably like a little bit older until it happened. 'Cause I guess that's when she started showing signs of having powers, and it terrified Iris. So what's even interesting is the fact is, when you listen to Eobard talking to Nora, giving her advice and everything, especially because it hits you weird, because it's like all that advice is the same advice he was giving Barry back in season 1, when he was pretending to be Wells, trying to pretend to be his mentor and everything, while also, subsequently just pretending and using Barry the entire time. So you just can't help but get that same feeling in this regard. He kind of gave her the same speech he gave Barry about phasing, but she couldn't do it, because I was like, oh, because I was like to say, because I remembered that being something she kind of had to learn present day. It's like, okay, that's why, because she was scared, and Eobard wasn't enough to make her feel okay enough to do it. It took family, her actual family, to kind of get her through that. But he did. I did like that moment of like, oh, having her run in front of that particular satellite and kind of having to time it right, and they both got hit. But I love that she lands on her feet on the building and keeps running up, and he gets hit hard. It's actually sad too, because it was actually a dude that Nora had run into, August. He's the same dude that she ran into at the Flash Museum. It is interesting, because what was he looking at? He was looking at the villains. So I guess he was trying to get inspired of like, I'm gonna be the greatest, I'm gonna be the best. He wanted to make it so that the Velocity 9 situation, obviously, not a repeat of trajectory. So he wanted to make it a more permanent thing. Obviously, it doesn't work out for him. So, but unfortunately for him, it doesn't end in the same situation as trajectory, so he lucked out in that regard as well too. So I'd also forgotten to talk about it at the beginning. I love that everyone kind of got a little pissed at Sherlock because of all of this, because obviously Iris is kind of like, you're the one that kind of did all this. It's like, how long have you been suspicious of Nora? He's like, since the beginning. And it's like, you haven't said anything. But for him, it's like, why would I act without any actual proof? He had to like gather up all the evidence. So for him, it's kind of a thing of like, he won't act unless he has all the evidence. Like, he will be suspicious, sure, but he won't say or act upon anything. And to be fair, he did bring his suspicions came up earlier in the season, and Iris quickly shut that down to be like, our daughter is telling us everything, so you need to drop whatever investigation you're doing, spying on her and stuff like that. So, but I love Sherlock walking away being like, you guys are misplacing all your anger. You're mad at me for uncovering the truth, blah, blah. He was obviously super pissed. It's like, you literally bring in the world's great, bring in such a great detective, and you're pissed when he gets results, essentially. So, but obviously the fact is that everyone's dealing with all of this. Iris is willing to give Nora a second chance to kind of explain herself, because it's like, she gave me a second chance. This is the very least I can do. But Barry has that frank conversation with Nora. It's kind of interesting, considering obviously she came to this time you know, the parent she adored the most was Barry, and it ends up being the parent she had issues with in the future, who ends up being the person, I guess you can make the argument, she's gotten the closest to, and ends up being the one that ended up freeing her, not what you might conclude might be her favorite parent, that being Barry. It's interesting considering her and Iris's relationship. Obviously, it's better here in present day, but it's just kind of ironic that she's the one ended up freeing her, especially when you can make the argument, and at least in Nora's mind, it's like, you're the one that bound me to begin with, taking my abilities away from me, lying to me my entire life. So there's that. But for Barry, it's that point of like, I get it. You had to go to Eobard. You had no one else you could rely on. That pisses me off. It's hard to handle, but sure. But what it's worse is like, you still went back to him. You learned what he did to my mom, what he did to our family, and you still went back to him. And she's pleading with him, and it breaks your heart even more. She's like, I promise I won't ever see Eobard again, because Barry decides to take her back to the future. It's like, I can't have you around here if I can't trust you. I can't have someone around that I can't trust. Brings her back to the future, and it's like, if you ever try to time travel again, I'll sense it in a speed force and I'll come stop you. And she's like, please, Dad, don't. And it breaks your heart. It's like, no, it sucks, dude. Like, it's sad because you can't help but look at Nora as this girl. You know, she's still kind of that little girl who missed her dad. Like, that's all this was. It was her trying to solve the case that was never able to be solved, and that was, you know, Cicada, and then, like, you know, wanting to see it and save her dad. That's what this was all about. And then at the end, you also had the confrontation between Barry and Eobard. And I love it's kind of a conversation. I figured, like, my thought process was that Eobard did all this for the particular reason of trying to mess with Barry's family in some shape or form. It's like, oh yeah, like, look what I've done to your daughter to made her into my pawn or something like that. And for him, it's like, you just couldn't help yourself. You literally had to come after another part of my family. You had to come after my daughter now. You've taken so much from me, and you did this. And he's like, well, that's why I told her not to tell you, because look how emotional you're getting, and blah, blah, blah. But Barry's basically like, no matter what, you always thought you were smarter than this, Eobard, but look at you now. I can't wait for you to get what you deserve. And obviously the clock is counting down to 10 minutes. So, I think I brought this up before, but 10 minutes to his execution, or are we talking 10 minutes until time catches up to him because he's been locked in this one single spot? So the paradoxes and stuff like that is finally catching up to him. I mean, to be fair, everything he was doing was about changing time and stuff like that so that he can have more control on weaving through time. I mean, that's why he was able to protect himself this long, is because he broke the rules of time travel when it came to himself doing the research that he did. So maybe that's finally catching up to him. He does seem like he is worried because his time is clicking down, but does he have more? Like, I still don't want to believe the whole thing of like, oh, he's actually good or whatever, like he has turned over a new leaf. It's like, no, he's evil. And he's got something planned. I think he needed Nora to do some more stuff because he needs things to kind of shift in a certain way. Once again, because we know she's from the future, Cicada, the older Gracie, but it's like, how she get there? I'm still banking on it being Eobard. She probably, but then, like, obviously Nora can sneak in with her powers. How would Cicada? How would Gracie? I mean, her powers are different, but I don't know. We'll see if that ends up being the case or whether she just ended up. It's like, it's just kind of interesting that she would end up time traveling on her own. Like, someone had to have told her. I would assume Eobard. So maybe because his cell is supposed to make it so that he can't really get out. It blocks his power. Even if that went away, he's able to, you know, he won't be able to phase through the walls either, but maybe he's found a way out. I mean, we do see that the guards do torture him. One in particular tortures him just because it's like, part of he's kind of like, it sucks that you're tortured, but another side he's kind of like, it's Eobard, it's Reverse Flash, he's kind of an asshole, so it leaves you with that conflicted feeling, so. A lot of interesting stuff came up, too, about, like, Cecile had never felt like, oh, Nora was hiding anything. They're like, yeah, so it can't, you know, that she had justifiable reasons for what she did. But at the same time, Cisco's like, yeah, but, you know, Eobard's a good manipulator and liar. I mean, how long he lied to them about who he really was. So maybe he had just passed that on to Nora. And that's kind of sad that she's that good of a liar that she's able to convince all of them for so long, you know, hide all of this. So, dude, this, like, it's, like I said, a great episode. I'm so curious to see how everything plays out from here. Like, what Iris is going to say, because Barry made that decision on his own. I'm sure Iris is not going to be happy about that. That's going to definitely cause some tension. I'm sure the team might be a little more split on that too. I mean, to be fair, like, they've all got their issues with Eobard, but I think the people who are going to have the biggest issue is probably Barry and Cisco. Because I think Cisco might be one of the people that kind of sees things more on Barry's side of things, and maybe other people on the team necessarily won't. Maybe Sherlock will, and that might lead to kind of, like I said, a split between the team. We'll have to wait and see, which is interesting because this is all happening while everything's going down with Gracie, and maybe that's the point, to have her out and about while everything's being chaotic. Like, maybe the whole point is to tear apart this family that Barry relies so heavily on, this family that's so important to him. Maybe not. We'll ultimately have to wait and see what goes down in the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.